This is your economics video for supply and demand examples. In the last couple of videos, we've been talking about supply and demand, and it's important that you know how to perfectly draw and label a supply and demand graph. Remember, every graph has to have a title. The title for a supply and demand graph should be the market you're looking at. Every graph should have an upward sloping supply line labeled supply sub 1. And your downward sloping demand line should be labeled demand sub 1. Your horizontal axis should be labeled quantity, and your vertical axis should be labeled price. Then you need to find the equilibrium, draw a dotted line over to the vertical axis, and label that P1 for price sub 1. And where that equilibrium, draw a dotted line down to the horizontal axis, and label that Q sub 1 for quantity sub 1. This particular video, we're going to talk about the types of examples that you'll see on tests and quizzes and how to properly analyze them. So once you have a perfectly labeled supply and demand graph, the questions are going to give you some type of event to analyze. That event is either going to shift the supply line or the demand line. Based upon the demand and supply curve shifters, the ones we've done previously and the ones you're supposed to memorize, you have to figure out if the event given to you in the question is one of those shifters of supply or demand. If the thing in the question is only talking about a change in price of the same product they're asking you on the graph, that will not shift supply or demand. That will create a shortage or a surplus. Any other event that's one of your shifters of supply and demand will shift either the entire supply line or entire demand line. Once you've figured out if it's a supply or demand shift, then you have to figure out if it goes to the right, which is an increase, or to the left, which is a decrease. Remember, you want to make your second supply or demand line in a new color. You want to label it with a sub 2, so either D sub 2 or S sub 2. And then in the new equilibrium, you want to draw your dotted lines over to your vertical axis, label it P sub 2 for price sub 2, and down to quantity for quantity sub 2. Once you've shifted the line and you've labeled it properly, you can see what has happened to the new price and quantity. And ultimately, they'll probably have you explain why you picked that line, why you decided to increase it or decrease it, and what is the outcome. The outcome is how price and quantity changed. So when you went from price 1 to price 2, did that go up or down? And did the quantity from quantity 1 to quantity 2 go up or down? So let's do some examples. So here our title is Market for Hybrid Cars. So for hybrid cars, we have our price and quantity. You can use just the letter P and just the letter Q to label your axes if you want. You do have to have a demand line sub 1 and a supply line sub 1, and then we are going to set our equilibrium here at P1 and Q1. So this is a perfectly labeled graph right now. The question here is telling us that there's an increase in the price of gas. So if gasoline prices go up, is that going to change how many people demand or want to buy hybrid cars? Or is it going to change the amount of people that are selling and producing hybrid cars? If you picked demand, you are correct. It is going to shift the demand line. Now you have to figure out if it's going to increase the demand or increase the amount of people buying hybrid cars or decrease the amount of people buying. So hopefully you picked the right one. Demand would shift to the right, which would be an increase in demand. And then we can shift our line in a new color. In this case, demand is going to increase or shift to the right. We're going to label that line demand sub 2. And now we have a new equilibrium, and that's going to be price sub 2 and quantity sub 2. So if we had to explain this, you could say that an increase in the price of gas means that one of the complements to buying a car, gasoline goes with a car, is now more expensive. And so sometimes when the complement is more expensive, people don't want to buy cars that are going to have a lot of gas. So they're going to substitute with a form of vehicle that doesn't use as much gas. Substitutes and complements are shifters of demand. And of course, it's going to increase the amount of people who buy hybrid cars. This ultimately means that the price of hybrid cars in the market is going to go up, and the quantity both bought and sold will also go up. All right, we're still in the same market for hybrid cars. This time I've changed the question on you. Now we have a new technology that reduces the cost of producing the hybrid car. So this is going to affect the production of hybrid cars. So is that going to be a shifter of the supply line or the demand line? Hopefully you said supply. Anything that goes into the making of a product affects the suppliers, which are producers and sellers. In this case, technology is a direct shifter of supply. So is this going to increase their supply or decrease it? Remember, the new technology is going to reduce the cost. So it's going to take them less money to produce the hybrid cars. Hopefully you said to the right, if it's going to take less money to produce the hybrid cars, then they're going to have more money left over to make more total cars than they did before. So again, we're going to shift this line in a new color. In this case, this is a supply increase. Remember, every time we move a line to the right, it's an increase. We're going to label it supply 2, and then we have to label our price and quantity P2 and Q2. Once the supply of hybrid cars rises, the price of hybrids on the marketplace is going to go down, and the quantity that is both bought and sold will go up. So now you have an active learning. In active learning 16, you're going to put on your active learning paper. And here I want you to draw 2 perfectly labeled supply and demand graphs. Both of these are going to be in the market for Starbucks coffee. You're going to do event A, a shift on one graph, and then the second graph you'll use for event B. Remember to draw a perfect labeled graph with the title and everything. Do both of those, and then your shifts for A and B you can do in a different color. So event A, on your first graph, you want to figure out what happens if there's a fall in the price of Dutch Brothers coffee. And then event B is if Starbucks negotiates a lower price for coffee beans. And you're going to do that shift in a new color on your second graph.